Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's Land Use Forum. I think we're going to start finding our seats and getting into tonight's agenda. We have some great speakers lined up and these hot, exciting, fun topics like the SEIS, or the Comprehensive Plan, or the GMA board process. Just find a seat and get settled in. So first, I just want to say thanks for coming out tonight. Having folks staying involved in this process is what's going to help make Clark County's future what we want. The Clark County Comprehensive Plan is a behemoth of a document that has lots of details in it, and it's a long process of updating that document, and it's hard to stay up to date with updating that document, and so having folks come out to events like this and learning more and sending in those comments is really important. So thanks a lot for coming out. First off, I wanted to say another thank you to the Clark County Food System Council for helping to put on an event like this. We have a number of Food System Council members in the room. I'm going to actually spotlight you guys. You guys could raise your hand, stand up. I see a number of you. Who are you in the room? The Clark County Food System Council members. Thank you. Thank you. We've been working tirelessly over the last couple months to put together this event and just trying to find other ways that we can stay, over the last couple of years, been meeting monthly, a couple times a month, to try to stay involved in the comprehensive plan update process. So thanks everybody for keeping up on that council. So tonight's agenda, the Food System Council identified 4 topics that we wanted to make sure that we are able to think about more as a community as we're dealing with the comprehensive plan. We have a speaker that's going to be speaking about food security, Sue Marshall, farmer out in the Richfield, Florida area, Baurs Corner. We have Mike Gallagher from the Department of Ecology. He's actually the Southwest Washington Regional Manager, speaking about our water resources. We have Tim Trohimovich. I just practiced this on from Futurewise. He talked about litigation and just kind of getting us a better sense of what happens when contention happens with the comprehensive plan update and we go to the GMA board. And then we will have Mike Bomar coming in a little bit later. Busy man. Some of you know him as Mike, some of you know him as Bomar. He's going to be coming and speaking about how does the comprehensive plan affect jobs and the economy. Just to kind of keep it on our radar, what our next steps are in comments, because tonight we're trying to educate citizens about these 4 topics, so we can have more educated comments on the comprehensive plan process. So we have 2 meetings coming up that are joint hearings of the Planning Commission and the Board of Clark County Commissioners meeting. That they are. Can someone?
September 3rd and September 10th.
Thank you, Naran. September 3rd and. Oh, are we up there on the board? Yeah, there we go. Here we go. Thank you. Are 2 hearings that you can come and learn more about what the counselors and the Planning Commission are talking about in the process, but also there will be a period for citizen comment. But also, a really important process is to submit comment. That comment is due by September 17th. And you can either, we have forms, you can fill it out tonight while the thoughts are on the top of your mind, and we'll actually bring it to the planning to the planners. Or you can go onto their website, email it, or even do one of those handwritten letters and mail it in. But yeah, we have to have that in by September 17th, and official letters like this will go into the public record, which is important in the long-term process of the comprehensive plan. We have a lot of tedious details we're going to be getting into, and so you can be thinking about the glass of wine and small plates that we'll be having later on tonight. If you'd like to join us down the road, we're going to be having a Clark County grown chef collaborative at Angst Gallery. We have 2 chefs cooking up small plates of Clark County grown foods, so you can taste a little bit of what we want to conserve. And the food will start at 7:30 and go till 9:30. I think with that, I'm going to pass it over to our speakers. Actually, before we get into the speakers, just some ground rules. We're going to have the presenters are going to be giving 10-minute presentations, and then we'll be opening it up to 5-minute questions. And we're asking that you only ask one question during the whole time. So use your question well, whichever speaker you would like to ask. And we're going to keep questions to 1 minute long. So it's not a time for us to express our ideas so much as to ask pointed questions. So we do have a person that will be bringing the mic to you. And I'll be giving a 10-second warning so we can kind of wrap up our questions. And so we can hope to get 2 to 3 questions in for each panelist. We do have tonight's event being recorded audio of Dave in the front. So with further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Tim from Futurewise. If you'd like to come on up and. Yes, and Anne helps remind me that we actually have tablers all along the edge that after the presentations are done, you can go around and talk with various advocacy groups to learn more about their positions on this process.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. As you know, my name is Tim Trohimovich. I'm the Director of Planning and Law for Futurewise. We are a statewide nonprofit organization. Our mission at Futurewise is to promote healthy communities and cities while protecting working farms, forests, and shorelines for this and future generations. We do this by research and analysis. We advocate for better planning at the local government level, at the state agencies, and in front of the legislature. We file strategic appeals of poor planning decisions, something that I'm sure will not be necessary for this version of the Clark County Comprehensive Plan. And then we assist citizen groups, the public, and state and local governments in planning for a better future for Washington State and for each of the cities and counties in Washington State. We work throughout Washington State to protect farmland. And this is something that our membership cares a lot about. And the reason they do it tends to vary from member to member. Some people want us to protect farmland because they recognize that it's important for the economy. For example, farming and ranching's a $50.8 million industry in Clark County as of 2007. Between 2012. Between 2007 and 2012, farm sales increased on a per farm basis by 5%. I wish my income had gone up by 5%. How many of you eat? I eat. Yeah, looks like most of you eat. That's good, because the option's not a very good one. And fresh local food is good for you. And we have many members, like many of you, that want to protect agricultural land because of fresh local food. Another reason that some of our members like to protect farmland is because they're fiscally conservative. They know that farms and ranches pay less in taxes. And in fact, for every dollar that a farm or a ranch pays in taxes to a county, they only require 51 cents in services. So the rest of that is available for us to use for other purposes. In contrast, residential developments require $1.25 for every dollar they pay in taxes. Preserving our farmland, conserving our ranch land saves taxpayers and ratepayers money. And that's another reason why people why Futurewise and its members want to protect agricultural land. The Washington State Growth Management Act requires every county and every city that has agricultural lands to designate and protect it. And what you see in front of you are the criteria for designating agricultural land. It can't already be characterized by urban growth. It has to be used or capable of being used for agricultural production. And this typically is either the land is used for agriculture or it has soils that make it suitable for agricultural production. And in Clark County, the criteria is that it has to be prime soils. That's a national ranking. Those soils are the best of the best. It's not land that's capable of being farmed. It's really the best farmland based on a national scale. So it's a pretty exacting standard that Clark County uses for designating agricultural land. And then finally, the third criteria is that it has to have long-term commercial significance. And there are 3 statutory criteria for long-term commercial significance. The first is the growing capacity, productivity, and soil composition of the land for long-term commercial production. So, are the soils suitable for long-term agricultural production? The second criteria is considering the land's proximity to population areas. Does it make sense for it to be farmed long-term? And then third, what is the possibility of more intense uses? So, now that you've seen the 3 long-term commercial significance criteria, are you now able to identify what are the farmland that should be protected in Clark County? How many people can do that? Well, no, I understand why you didn't raise your hand, because this, frankly, is what we fight over. When we fight over agricultural land, we're typically fighting over, does it have long-term commercial significance? Because the soils is pretty straightforward. You look on a soils map and say, okay, well, what kind of soils are here? Not characterized by urban growth. That's relatively straightforward too. You look and see, are there houses on it at urban densities? Is there an office building on it? Is there a manufacturing facility on it? Or has this land vested development on it? Again, that's a pretty straightforward, objective kind of question. But it's the long-term commercial significance that we end up fighting over. And when we fight, typically where we go first is to the Growth Management Hearings Board. The Growth Management Hearings Board is a small 7-person state agency, and they act through 3-person panels. Every panel has to include a former local government elected official. There has to be a lawyer on it if it's possible. And then you cannot have any more than 2 members of the same political party on a panel if it's possible. Now, if it's not possible to do any of those things, there is an exception process, but generally speaking, that's what you try to do. They decide appeals of whether or not comprehensive plans and development regulations and their amendments comply with the Growth Management Act. They look at shoreline master programs and decide whether they comply with the Shoreline Management Act. And then they consider appeals of the Office of Financial Management 20-year population forecast and whether they should be adjusted. You've probably been hearing a lot, I presume, I'm sure you have because I have too, hearing a lot about population forecasts. The Office of Financial Management does 3 forecasts for 20 years for every county in Washington state, and each county and the cities in those counties pick a number that's within that range, and that's what they plan for 20 years. And the board shall find compliance unless it determines that the action by the state agency, county, or city is clearly erroneous in the view of the entire record before the board and in the light of the goals and the requirements of the Growth Management Act. To find an action clearly erroneous, the board must be left with a firm and definite conviction that a mistake has been committed. That's the standard that the Growth Management Hearings Board uses to decide these questions. When the last comprehensive plan was adopted, there was quite a lot of disagreement over that comprehensive plan, and Futurewise was a party to the Karpinski et al. Versus Clark County case. And that decision that process took from 2007 to 2014 because it got appealed all the way to the Washington State Supreme Court. And at the end of it all, the board held that if agricultural lands of long-term commercial significance are properly de-designated, then they're candidates for inclusion within an urban growth area. But if they're not properly de-designated, if they qualify as agricultural lands of long-term commercial significance, you cannot include them within an urban growth area. And so this tends to be a very big decision. Should these lands be de-designated? Should they be included in the urban growth area? But even if they're de-designated, they still have to meet the other criteria for being in an urban growth area. And those are principally, the number one criteria is that the urban growth area is not big enough. That taking into account the projected population and the jobs and the retail and the schools and all the other kinds of things that it needs, plus a reasonable market supply factor if the local government chooses to use that, well then, is the UGA big enough? If the UGA is big enough, and if you read the EIS, it says that it is for the current population projection, then you can't expand it. Whether the land is designated or de-designated or not doesn't matter. The land must also be next to the urban growth area, and you must update your capital facility plans and your transportation plans to accommodate that growth. In the Clark County decision, at the end of the day, the board and the courts concluded that 1,500 acres added to the UGAs met the criteria for agricultural lands of long-term commercial significance and could not have been added to it. And so Clark County ultimately removed those lands from the urban growth area, changed them back to their agricultural designation. And we very much appreciate that. So I was also asked to mention, what's the impact of all of this on, on taxpayers? Well, one of the impacts is that sometimes you end up with land in the urban growth area that ought not to be in the urban growth area. For example, Washington, you vest early. If you apply for a building permit or you apply for a subdivision, and those applications are complete, that's when you vest. And so 884 acres of land that the Growth Management Hearings Board concluded qualified as agricultural land that should not have been in the urban growth area. They got annexed by several cities, and boom, that was it. We couldn't do anything about them at that time, although we have a theory on how we're going to deal with that next time if we have to. So now the taxpayers and ratepayers have to fund the public facilities and services to serve areas that ought not to have been in the urban growth area. Low-density residential development costs more than it generates in taxes. It's a bad deal for everyone. In contrast, compact urban growth areas cost less to serve with capital facilities and services are now a better deal. In addition to that, if you're a county and city that's in violation of the Growth Management Act, during the time you're in violation, you don't qualify for certain Washington state grants and loans. And then finally, of course, if there are appeals, it can cost the local government money. We tend to be very cost effective in our appeals, and we find that we spend a whole lot less than local governments do. And that is all I have time to say, and that's all I wanted to say. And thank you very much for your attention. In addition to having questions, I'm going to be tabling over there if you want to ask me some further questions. And thank you again for the opportunity.
We have a lot of details to offer us, but he just drove a long ways to get us here. So I want to give us another round for him.
And back in one day. So this is nothing.
So question number one, we have a mic here. Does anyone have a question? No, here.
Can you define commercial significance?
I did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The three statutory criteria are the growing capacity in soils, the land's proximity to population areas, and the possibility of more intense uses of land. In addition to that, there's some things called the WAC factors, the Washington Administrative Code factors, that break that down in more detail. But those are the statutory factors in the Growth Management Act.
What I guess I was getting at is you referred to some ground that was capable of being farmed. By what definition is it farmable? No, I'm saying, is there an income level? Is there a quantity produced?
It's soils.
Is it all?
In Clark County, it's whether or not it's those prime agricultural soils, those soils that meet a national criteria for the best farmland in the country.
Any other questions? Back in the back.
I got it. Good.
I can do the workout.
Is there any, I'm not sure that's on. Is there any consideration
the WAC factors is the predominant parcel size in the area. So a county can take into account the predominant parcel size in an area. So yes. And Clark County actually has a criteria that is the predominant parcel size. It's not defined as any particular acreage though.
Question there.
I think they're working on the mic.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, my name's Ann Lawrence, and I have a small farm in just north of the Costco off in Grayson. And I would say I was questioning, and I don't know if you have the answer, if someone else doesn't have the answer. At what point did that resource land criteria come about? Because some of the best agricultural soils in Clark County are already covered and have been, for a long time. I'm saying Hillsborough sandy loam soil and some of the soils near me, they're covered with houses and continuing to be covered with houses. Anyone?
So the question was, when did this criteria come up to pass? Actually, the criteria for agricultural land was in the first piece of the Growth Management Act adopted in 1990. So it dates back to 1990. But it took local governments quite a long time, and in fact, it took Clark County quite a long time to actually get their first GMA compliant comprehensive plan in place. And so it was typically the late 90s before those criteria were applied.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're done with questions for this round. I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on to Mike Gallagher.
I will be over there, though, as I said.
Yes.
So if you have any questions, love to talk to you.
Okay, thanks for having me here tonight. It's impossible to talk about water rights and water law in 12 minutes, but I'll do my best. Who owns the water? You own the water. All water, all surface water, all groundwater in Washington is owned in common by the people. And a water right for water that is greater than 5,000 gallons a day on exempt wells, which I'll get to shortly, anything above that from groundwater or any amount of surface water, even a bucket full of surface water, requires a water right. A water right is the beneficial use of a reasonable quantity of public water for beneficial purpose during a certain period of time that occurs at a certain place. The beauty of that is that once you have a water right, you have that right to the exclusion of everyone else. There's three basic types of water rights. There's a claim, which is you claim you used the water from the surface prior to the Surface Water Code of 1917, 98 years ago, or the Groundwater Law of 1945, 70 years ago. Most claims are likely not valid. Most claims are for exempt wells, and the exempt well doesn't need a claim, but people had an opportunity in the 70s and 80s to file claims, and they filed a lot of them, and only a superior court can determine the validity of a claim. So we leave that to the superior court if it becomes a legal issue. What we focus on are water right permits and certificates. A certificate is basically a perfected permit, and once it becomes a certificate, it is a legal record, it's recorded with the county auditor, and it becomes a property right. Statewide, we have 53,000 water rights, 50,000 certificates, 3,000 permits, and another 170,000 claims, and over 400,000 permit-exempt individual wells. How do you get a water right? Well, it's not easy, but it can be done. You have to answer yes to these four basic questions. Is proposed use beneficial? That's a pretty easy question. Is the water available both physically and legally? That is a very difficult question, and it can oftentimes cost the applicant tens of thousands of dollars to figure out. Will the existing use, this is a double negative, it's not meant to be. Will other users not be impaired? I should take one of those wills out. Again, that's another tough question to answer, especially with groundwater. And will the proposed use not be detrimental to public welfare? That's generally an easy question. If all four of those questions are answered affirmatively, then you can get a water right, and there's no appeals to your application process. You get a water right permit, which specifies you have a right to this source of water from groundwater or surface water at this many gallons per year or day, but usually gallons per year, for the purpose of irrigation or the purpose of multiple domestic purposes or municipal or stock watering at this location year-round, or maybe from May 1st to September 30th for irrigation. You have that right at the exclusion of everyone else. Here's some beneficial uses that are most common. Probably the most common are irrigation and municipal. There's industrial uses, fish propagation, wildlife, recreation, livestock watering, and power generation. Power generation is considered a non-consumptive use, but dams need a water right for the privilege of having the water go through their turbines, according to state law. This is the differentiation of groundwater and surface water. So if you live in a rural area and you're on a domestic well, you have your own water supply by well, the first 5,000 gallons of that per day is exempt from needing a water right. In addition, the first half acre or less of non-commercial lawn and garden is exempt from a water right, and stock watering is also exempt. And finally, if you have a commercial or industrial enterprise on your property, using that same exempt well, you can use an additional 5,000 gallons a day for that commercial enterprise, including farming. For surface water, any amount withdrawn needs a water right. Basically, when we look at water rights from ground, we measure them in gallons per minute. When we see them from the surface, such as a spring, a river, or a lake, it's in cubic feet per second. So here's the stages that one goes through. One applies, and in reality, you wait several years unless you hire a consultant to help process your water right for you. If you pass the 4-part test in the application process, we issue a permit. It gives you several years to perfect your water right. You do a proof of appropriation to claim that your water right is perfected at this many gallons per minute or this many acre feet per year for this beneficial use, and you get a certificate, which then becomes a property right. This is probably for most of you the most informative or useful slide. Again, what can I use an exempt well for? You can use it for providing water for livestock. There's no gallon per day limit or acre restriction. You can use it to water a non-commercial lawn or garden. Non-commercial, your own lawn, your own private garden. Half acre or less, again, no gallon day per limit. You can legally flood that half acre. It'd be ridiculous to do so, but you can. You can provide water for a single home or a group of homes. 6-pack, up to usually the maximum allowed under State Department of Health regulations is 14 hookups. That's about 300 gallons a day per home for indoor domestic use. That can be done under a permit exemption of less than 5,000 gallons a day. And in addition, you can, for various commercial, industrial, including agricultural purposes, for-profit farming, use an additional 5,000 gallons a day. No acre limit. A lot of small farms, greenhouse operations that sell food for profit at farmers markets and elsewhere use this provision, and they successfully farm 2 to 3 to 5 acres. And even though you're exempt from a water right process and the application process, all other water laws and regulations still apply. And you can't irrigate 2 acres by drilling 4 wells, each for half acre. If you are limited on your property to a half acre of non-commercial lawn and garden irrigation, otherwise anything above that you would need a water right. And like I said, if it's greater than 5,000 gallons a day for domestic use or the commercial industrial use, you also need a water right. Water is very critical in our state. As you can see, this annual precipitation map in a normal year, not this year, but certainly a normal year, looks a lot like this. Wet in the Olympics, wet in the Cascades, wetter in western Washington than eastern Washington. The real challenge we have, and especially this year, is the demand is highest, that red line, when the supply is least. Stream flows are at their lowest. We were basically up to last Friday, record low stream flows throughout Washington state. With the rain event that we had, there's a slight blip for a few days. Expected dry weather later on this week will continue, and that flow is going to drop dramatically to probably 10 days from now, assuming it stays relatively dry, we won't realize that we had that blip in the first place. That's where we're at right now. It's important to remember that wells, especially wells located near streams, can withdraw water from the stream if there's enough pumping there, and that's something that we're very concerned about. It can impact stream flows. Maybe not one single well, but multiple wells in a basin, multiple domestic exempt wells can certainly impact stream flow. We look at the state in 62 watersheds. You're in watersheds 28 and 27, depending on where you live in Clark County. We have a statewide in-stream flow program where we've developed regulations on a variety of these watersheds that are highlighted in this map here of the state. There are in-stream flow rules for watershed 27 and 28. We were authorized under a few laws a few years ago as an effort somewhat similar to the Growth Management Act, but in a similar vein, but to protect and preserve fish migration, wildlife habitat, recreation, navigation, aesthetics, water quality, and livestock watering. And so we're very conscious of and working in concert with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and other organizations and the tribes here in Washington, because low flows, this time of year especially, maybe not the Columbia River out here because that's tidal influence, but certainly Salmon Creek, for example, the East Fork of the Lewis River, the Lewis River itself, in your area, the Washougal River as well, are really at low flows for this time of year. And that can lead to loss of habitat, egg incubation mortality. Certainly the temperatures in those rivers are higher than normal. There's increased competition for food. There's increased disease. Anytime you have low flow, all these things add up, and the use of water impacts low flows. I'm not talking specifically about Clark County, but again, your two watersheds. Watershed 27, which starts at Mount Adams and is basically the Lewis River drainage. There are currently 959 water rights certificates, 27 permits, and over 3,500 claims. There's 62 applications for new water waiting in line and 2 change applications. And in the Salmon Washougal watershed, there's an additional 1,540 certificates, 38 permits, almost 7,000 claims, and 71 new applications. And recently, a few years ago, there was 2 separate water management in-stream flow rules, one for the Lewis River, Wyver 27, and one for the Salmon Washougal Wyver 28. These rules, when they went into effect in January of 2009, only affect water right decisions made after the effective date of those rules' adoption. They do not affect the existing water rights that I listed on the previous 2 slides. Those are grandfathered in. They were based on recommendations from a watershed plan developed by locally led individuals in what were at the time planning units in Wyver's 27 and 28. They were 36-person planning units representing a variety of interests, including counties, cities, water purveyors, and other organized groups. And they were developed through a collaborative several-year process and approved by both Clark, Cowlitz, and Skamania County commissioners in 2006. And I'll hold off details because I'm up on my time here, but the rules basically include 5 key elements. They set in-stream flows. Those in-stream flows for the various rivers and creeks in those 2 basins become water rights in and of themselves. So it's very difficult new applications have to basically prove that they're not taking water from the river or stream, thereby impacting that now senior water right. It also closes subbasins to future withdrawals of surface water. It designates certain areas such as your Vancouver Lake area, the mouth of the Lewis River as regional water supply areas for future water supply. It establishes reservation for future water use and specifies conditions of use for access to water for those reserves. And there's more details here, which I won't cover right now, but thank you for your attention. I'll have some handouts. I'll be over here afterwards. I have some handouts of my slides and some other information for you if you're interested, so I'll be glad to address any questions. Thank you.
All right, so now we're moving on to our question period. I would like to, before we jump into that, also highlight that we do have these comment cards that you can use to take notes. Mike just provided us a lot of different details that we could be including in our comments. So Ann Foster here has some pins and some comment cards. If you want to raise your hand, if you want some paper, she'll bring it on over to you. And we now also will move into questions. We have a question. Right here. But bring a mic over. Heather, is there a mic?
I've heard it asserted that roofs, runoff from roofs actually recharges the
Aquifer, yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Is that true?
Yeah, any water
Can
that,
you speak to that?
yes, any water that goes into the ground is recharging your aquifer. I mean, 99% of the recharge of Clark County is rainfall. Maybe not 99%, but a lot of it. You know, some of it's snowpack too in your foothills. But your rainfall that isn't lost to evaporation off the pavement is recharging your aquifers.
So in that situation, can there be any restrictions on using water runoff from your roof?
You can use rainwater collection for individual purposes. I can provide that information to Warren, and you can put it on the website, but we do have a rainwater collection policy that allows individuals to use their existing roofs. It doesn't necessarily allow you to build a bunch of roofs, but you can use your existing house, your existing structures to collect rainwater for personal use.
Question in the back.
Do you have information regarding the tidal aquifers, that Clark Public Utilities is required to utilize as well?
There are two basic aquifers in this area that provides public water or a lot of water. There's the Pleistocene alluvial aquifer and the Troutdale Formation. Those are two separate aquifers on both the Washington and Oregon side of the Columbia River. They are extensively prolific aquifers.
And those are the tidal ones, is that right? That's what the Clark Public Utilities said, that the Department of Ecology has the new manual now that is requiring them to use the tidal aquifers.
They are considered, I guess you could say they're considered tidal in that the Columbia River is tidal all the way up to Bonneville Dam. But they're roughly 100 to 200 feet below ground here. But they're basically, the entire Columbia River Valley is a large bowl of alluvium, of which those are very permeable layers beneath us, and because of that, and because of the size of the Columbia River, they are incredibly productive aquifers.
One more question.
How does one access local in-stream flow levels, and who monitors that?
Local in-stream flow levels are monitored. We have some gauging stations on our website. I believe Clark County also does some gauging, and also the Geological Survey does gauging of the larger rivers such as the Lewis and the Washougal, for example. I know Clark Public Utility gauges the Salmon Creek because we have a provision in one of their water rights that when Salmon Creek goes below 10 cubic feet per second, like it is now, except maybe not this last weekend, but they have to divert water or stop using some wells near Salmon Creek and go to their South Vancouver Lake well field. But between Ecology, Geological Survey, and the local county, that's how they're monitored. There's one more.
So I was wondering, sir, as far as water rights are concerned, just reading about the national debt being at $22 trillion, $660 billion, and avoiding last government shutdown. Will that have any effect on water rights locally, as far as citizens' rights, or will that? How does that work?
Water law is a state law. It's not a federal law. So we have nothing to do with the national debt or with the Congress. Put it this way: when a decision or a law, state law is appealed under the Surface Water Code or the Groundwater Code, unless it involves Oregon or Idaho, our Supreme Court in Olympia, that's it.
Texas isn't that.
There's no issue back in Washington, D.C. unless it's between states.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Sue Marshall, who will speak to us about food security coming in from Baurs Corner Farm out in the Richfield, Florida area. And just wanting to know, like, I guess the chef is saying that the fresh chef from Conway Farms is amazing in tonight's small plates. So if you want to try it later, we'll have some for it. Okay.
Thank you, Warren. I hope everyone can hear me. First, I'd like to thank the Clark County Food System Council for organizing this event and all the volunteers who helped pull it off. It's a very important topic we're covering. I did a lot of reading this weekend, and it turns out I have maybe more to say than I have time, but I'll do my best. So I'll just jump right in. I want to give you a little bit of background about my family. I'm married into a farming family, the Baurs, Mary and Carl. They bought our farm in 1960, 2 parcels, a 30-acre parcel and a 36-acre parcel. It had been, we bought it from a farmer, had been a dairy. They grew fruit trees, walnuts, produce, a number of things. The Bauer family planted 4,500 Bartlett pear trees on the 30-acre parcel. So we had a very nice pear orchard for a number of years. Things were going pretty well until 2000. And we had several factors came into play. We had a number of years of consistently low prices from the cannery. We were getting 7 cents a pound for our pears. There were imports from overseas that were driving the price down, and the cost continued to go up. So at that time, it was really not economically feasible to continue harvesting our pears, so we bulldozed the bulk of them, kept 30 pear trees because we wanted our children to continue to have an agrarian experience. And like many other family farms, there were a number of things coming into play over the next 15 years. Aging parents, adult children that have their own careers, kids, homes, not able to take on the responsibilities of the farm. So we leased out the bulk of our farm to a neighboring farm, and subsequently several other crops were grown over time. Raspberries, strawberries, and it's currently in grass seed. I mention all these different crops because our farm does not have water rights. We're dry land farmers, and there's a number of things that you can grow on without water rights. They need to have a nice tap root, or they have to be drought tolerant. So we were able to do pretty well, and the farmer we leased to is doing pretty well without irrigation. What you need, though, if you don't have irrigation, is larger acreage to make that work, because you don't have the options of growing some of the higher value crops. Things are looking up, though, just recently for the farm, because with my husband and I retiring, and the other family members deciding they wanted to cash out, or they really weren't up to farming, and a daughter who's interested in farming, we bought 20 acres of the farm and have moved back out to the farm, and are optimistic for our future. And we also hope to add an additional 9 acres, so that would give us 29 acres to work with. The underlying zoning for our property is Ag 20. We think it is very important to retain that Ag 20 designation as protection into the future for multiple generations, to protect that land in agriculture. We'd like to think that, but what we've seen is that from one planting cycle to the next, there can be total upheaval. Particularly alternative 2 and 4, my jaw dropped when I realized they were eliminating altogether the Ag 20 designation. So the largest acreage that would be designated would be Ag 10. Not enough to really protect agriculture. And I know that you've all seen across the landscape, and a lot of this, I think, happened before 1990 when the Growth Management Act came into play, but past decisions that really resulted in a lot of parcelization of the agricultural land, and you can see beautiful homes with large acreage and lots of lawn. Not exactly a good use of our prime soils. Before I go into, because I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the alternatives with an agricultural proponent lens, but I want to just explain a little bit about the importance of having large acres or dedicated to farming. The per acre cost goes up the smaller the unit of acres. So for example, with our property, because we had a number of assessments with buying out our family partners, if you look at a 20-acre parcel, maybe that's $10,000 to $11,000 an acre. You divide that into a 10-acre parcel, that would go up to $20,000 to $29,000 an acre. You take that down to 5, 2.5, 1. It could go up tenfold or more. So it doesn't really make the property and the land more available. Large blocks of agricultural land provide more of a long-term stability and resiliency for agriculture. You could plant that orchard and realize, your return in 50 years. Your investment is not going to be bulldozed. Well, we had 40 years. We had a pretty good run with our pears. And large blocks of farming land help support the necessary infrastructure that goes along with farming. Just like any kind of industry, there's an infrastructure that supports that industry. So storage, equipment, processing, marketing, just that whole network that helps agriculture thrive. I was reading through the American Farmland Trust has a fact sheet on zoning, because basically the comp plan is zoning, protection of ag land through zoning. And one thing that they noted was that ordinances that allow construction of houses on lots of 1 to 5 acres often hastens the decline of agriculture by allowing residences to consume far more land than necessary. And particularly alternatives 2 and 4 consume far more agricultural land than we want if we want agriculture to continue in Clark County. So with this new revision of the comp plan, it was mentioned about the population assumptions. Population assumptions have been revised, so it's reduced 32% reduction from the previous projections that were done in 2007. Another assumption that was changed going forward is the annual growth rate. It was 2%, it's down to 1.25%. With these reductions, in my mind, I would think they would have come up with an alternative that would have scaled back the impacts on agricultural lands. But we don't have that option. We have all of the options, still have a major impact in furthering to divide agricultural lands. Let's see. The other assumption that is made is that 90% of the new growth, the population, will go into the urban growth areas, and that 10% will go into the rural areas. All 4 of the alternatives are above that 10%. So I'll just go really quickly through the alternatives. So alternative 1, the so-called no action alternative, would just continue the plan as it was adopted in 2007. That continuation increases new lots in rural areas by just over 7,000. So further divisions in an already landscape that has been pretty well impacted by dividing up the agricultural land. This would result in 14% of the projected population going into agricultural land. So that's alternative 1. Alternative to countywide modification, so it eliminates the Ag 20 designation, encourages clustering to create smaller lots in rural areas, expand rural centers. It increases the new lots in rural areas by 8,220. So an additional about 1,000 new subdivisions, lots in rural areas, and the bulk of it, about 1,000, is all coming out of agricultural lands. This alternative 2 will impact 34,000 acres across the county, and the population that goes into the rural area would be 16% of the population that's projected. So again, 6% over that 10%, which was the assumption. Alternative 3, expand city-urban growth areas, bringing in collectively a total of 254 acres. It's very similar in its impact to Alternative 1 as far as agricultural lands go, and it would be 14% population growth in the rural areas. So this 1 and 3 seem similar in impact, but the question might arise, why expand these growth areas at all if the population growth is going to be, what I say, 32% less than projected in 2007? Oh, 2 minutes, okay, I'll be quick. So alternative 4 is really the doozy. It talks about retrofitting zoning so that all of those past bad decisions that divvied up the land will now be enshrined, and they want to create even more of these divisions so it'll be compatible with these past bad decisions. That it would create a lot more 1, 2.5, and 5 acre lots, and again, eliminating the Ag 20. It would create 12,400 new lots, and 24, not 10, 24% of the population expected growth would be going into the rural area. Just a couple things from the environmental impact statement. On to alternative 2 and 4. Creates more housing than needed. Diminishes the county's ability to attract large-scale agriculture. Would not support state regulations controlling sprawl. New transportation facilities would be needed, and the existing ones would need to be maintained. This would fall to the county. The cost would only be partially recovered by fees. The cost, this is what it says, the cost for alternative 2 and 4 would be prohibitive. Needed infrastructure, power line, schools, support services would change the character of rural Clark County. So that's what it says in the environmental impact statement regarding alternative 2 and 4. So there's a lot at stake. For us, we take it very personally. We have a family history. My husband's parents' ashes are scattered under the pear trees, and my son was married in the under the 100-year king apple tree. So we very much would like to keep it in agriculture. So I just encourage everyone to really, really get involved with this process. And aside from the zoning aspect of protecting agriculture, there was, I'm just going to wave 2 things around more and then I'll be done. Agriculture Preservation Strategies report, you can find it online, it's packed full of really good ideas and strategies to support agriculture. And I know that Clark County...
was anybody in the room involved in that process that wanted to? Oh, we got a whole bunch, yeah.
Oh, you did a great job. Clark County Food System Council has some policy recommendations too. Again, apart from the zoning aspect, transfer of development rights and establishing agricultural production zones that we could all just keep working on whatever happens with all of these alternatives. So.
We have some copies of that back here.
Great. Thank you very much.
Kelly.
Yeah.
So, what was it that was the barrier to your family getting a water permit, or even since it was an old farm, a claim?
We haven't tried. We've heard and been discouraged about the process. And we had our pear orchard, and we grew wheat on the other property, and it's in grass seed now, so we've done fine. We have a domestic well, and so that covers the lawn and our personal garden and things like that. And actually, we could expand that, I guess, 5,000 gallons per day. If we wanted to do some small acreage, but we've done okay.
Does anybody want to go further into that?
I do.
Yeah, Pam.
So we have in the Farm Bureau, we have several friends who have waited for water rights for a really long time, and one of our friends died a number of years ago, and prior to that he had filed for water rights for an existing blueberry farm, and he waited at least 13, possibly 16 years, and as far as I know that has never come to fruition. His wife, I believe, is selling the place, but it's our understanding, and this I'll direct to Mike Gallagher, it's our understanding that when you apply for a water right and you're just an individual who wants to farm or use it for personal use, that actually a municipality or an industry can jump ahead of you in line. Is that correct?
They can hire a consultant and process the application that way. In other words, they pay the consultant. We don't have staffing to process all the water right applications. There's over 5,000 applications statewide.
Right,
And
so they pay the consultant and then they can go ahead of you in line because you haven't provided
as
proof.
long as the consultant and the application process demonstrates it won't impair your water right or your application. Otherwise, they have to also process your application.
So why would it take 16 years and not even hear an answer?
That's a good question.
I'm going to ask that we move on.
I just wanted to add one point. When your water right is approved, it relates back to the date you apply. So if you apply before an industrial user or a municipal user, your priority date is going to be earlier than theirs. So the date of the application is when your priority date establishes, and the priority date is critical.
Thanks.
Next question.
I'm wondering what your choice would be of the alternatives. It sounds like you don't want 2 and 4, but you're not crazy about 1 and 2.
They haven't produced an alternative that I like.
So what would you like to see happen?
I think it would be the alternative 1, no action, even though it still has those 7,000 new lots in rural community. At least it retains Ag 20 and doesn't further institutionalize.
And is there any other option that can happen? Does it have to be one of the
alternatives? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think, let's suggest another alternative that's less. That's what I'm going to put in my comments. There's no rationale to further divide the agricultural community because of the growth of population. That's something.
If you want another alternative, Tim might be able to help you with that one, but that's another conversation. But on that question, the process isn't going to be 1, 2, 3, or 4. The counselors are going to be given an option to choose little bits from each alternative. I personally don't like the framework that they have used of all 1, 2, 3, or 4 because it's really a whole list of options that the counselors are going to be given. So there would be an option where they primarily choose to go with 1, but go with a lot of the city's requests in alternative 3, and maybe a couple of the things in alternative 2, and maybe something in alternative 4. It's probably what it might end up looking like. So it's not 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's going to be a little bit of all of that. Susan Rasmussen.
Thank you. This is a big concern over water rights. Because I can tell you some personal experience. I've been in line for those water rights about 12 years, 12 to 15. I've lost count. And with the dryness this year, I can tell you our tonnage is way down on the hay and grain. the ability to irrigate speaks to your bottom line. It speaks to the long-term viability of your farm. This is a critical issue. If you don't have the acres out there that are irrigatable, you don't have a commercially viable agriculture industry. And in my view, it's about options for these farmers. Now you look at Chelan County this year and all the fires. It's a big orchard community.
I'm sorry, we only have 1 minute for questions.
Okay.
5 more seconds.
I just want to say they built their comp plan around allowing those orchards options after if they have several seasons of drought or fire wipes out their crop, they have the ability to sell off a couple of acres without selling off their whole farm. And I think that's a good consideration.
I would just say that the comp plan is not going to address water rights. But a question to consider is if you add an additional 12,000 lots in the rural community with all of them sinking wells and putting in septic systems, does that make things overall better for agriculture or worse?
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Sue. We have these comment cards. We've been given a lot of information. We have pens and paper. Would like to take notes. And next up, we have Mike Bomar coming on up from Columbia River Economic Development Council, making sure our county got a job, and talk a little more about how that works with comprehensive plan process. And I'm just going to throw a slide up here.
Thanks, Warren. Thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak about jobs. And I just want to say, I think I've been doing comp plan for over 10 years now, and this is probably the most diverse group of interests that I've seen collected in a non-formal setting. So just really appreciate everybody taking the time to be here, and also the opportunity to just chat a little bit about what the Columbia River Economic Development Council is doing. Our strategic initiatives, I'll go over those. I'll talk about how land use plays into jobs and what we're able to recruit and how jobs come to be in Clark County, and then also specifically to the comp plan, some of the things that we've highlighted or concerns that we've had as well. So first of all, the CRDC is a public-private partnership. We exist to accelerate business growth and innovation in Clark County, so we're growth biased in that sense, that we exist to both help our existing businesses, to help plan for economic growth, and then also to help recruit businesses into the area, so we're a marketing entity, per se, for the region as well. The easiest way to think about our strategic initiatives, it breaks down into 5 different areas. The first is to become more of a high-tech hub in the region. Certainly that has land use implications, and that has played out in large industries in the semiconductor and other larger companies that are in the area, but also software development, less place-oriented tech firms as well, too, that have been working on strategies around how to help them grow and attract them into the region. The second initiative is around leveraging our educational partnerships. That's WSU and Clark College, but also a whole variety of educational interests, whether it's technical training or K through 12, increasing the STEM networks influence in the region, and other educational partners as well. The third one is foreign direct investment, international investment. It's really about bringing outside money into the region to help grow the economic wealth of our area. And the fourth we call the business growth pipeline. It's really everything from helping folks with I have an idea to some of our largest employers and helping them with the tools that they need to stay in the region or expand in the region. And the fifth, which is most applicable to tonight, is the Land for Jobs initiative we call, which is really about making sure that our infrastructure investments are planned in a way that is efficient and consistent with the type of jobs that we want, that our comprehensive planning process that we're weighing in to ensure that we get quality jobs as far as trade sector, as far as wages, employment, livability, and also impact on other community goals. And then also our permitting processes and the general business climate environment is friendly in a way that also attracts those same types of jobs. As far as types of jobs that we focused on, it's been around computer technology, computer products, metals manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, wealth management. The biggest one of those is Fisher Investments, obviously, with their recent location in the area. Agricultural processing, as well as logistics and distribution. So those are some of the target sectors that we work on. But again, we serve the broad business community and work to help any businesses in the region, whether it's directly or through our partners, to help them be successful. This comprehensive plan, it's been interesting in some sense because we're coming out of that recession. And one of my biggest frustrations, both when previously working on the residential side and now working more in the employment side, has been that we tend to look back to try to project forward. So we're always playing this game where we're over-planning or we're under-planning for this next cycle of growth. You could be optimistic about it and say eventually it works itself out in the long term, but it creates a lot of litigation in the process, and it also takes a lot of the real feel out of what we're doing in planning. So our focus was on a couple of things initially. We had some concerns around population growth, the projection lowering down. That implies when you come back to the calculations and the assumption with the jobs to household ratio, if you lower your population, ultimately you're planning for less jobs into the area. We've seen certainly an increasing demand for jobs, and so had some concerns there. We're really focused on increasing that jobs to household ratio and also the market factor as far as what jobs are likely not because of market reasons, whether projects are not or properties are not for sale, or other factors that lead them not to convert, to try to increase that to be more realistic. So we haven't focused so much on the population deficiency and focused a little bit more on trying to prop up the amount of jobs within that assumption that are available. Within all four, our concerns are more long-term and conceptual than short-term. I can certainly empathize with property rights and wanting to assist with those property owners who are having struggles with incompatibilities and making sure that they can go forward. For us, looking at bigger picture, having large pieces of property that are contiguous, we've looked at anywhere from 20 to 25 acres for the types of larger employers that we see coming in as significant sites that are needed to be able to bring in some of those target jobs that we're looking for. And with potential parcelization, particularly with larger estate type lots, those make it more difficult or require more public assistance ultimately to be able to make those projects pencil out. So our concern is more about just the bigger picture of those next waves and an increasingly limited supply of industrial land and what we do with those pieces in order to ultimately either be able to convert them or to make more valuable use out of them as viable ag pieces. So with that, I think I'll open it up to questions. And again, I apologize, I was working on WSU strategic plan, so working on to the next one here, but I really appreciate the opportunity and thanks for your patience with me and being late.
All right, we have 5 minutes of questions here. We have sir.
The projected growth that the county adopted has been disputed by some. Are you happy with their projection?
The population growth?
Correct.
So I wouldn't say I'm happy with it. I'm not as concerned as some stakeholders are based on what their attempts is or what they're looking to achieve. I don't think, I think it's overly constrictive. I don't think it's hyper constrictive, but it's certainly, if you look at longer term, again, that frustration of looking just a few years back to project the next 3 years for us hasn't been a very good predictor of what's going on. So we work a lot in business cycles, in ups and downs, growth cycles have those very similar trends as well. So with what we're currently seeing, certainly in areas like Ridgefield, the boom's going on there, it's really hard to say that we're going to grow at that rate and have that be consistent. So the frustration's really been about the numbers game. You can make it work. There's lots of, if you're into the comp plan, there's lots of little tricks and ways that you can get around it. But in reality, I don't think it's a real number. I think there's good comments made by one of our partners about the risk in, there's a greater risk from a public investment standpoint in saying you're going to have a lot of population versus having not enough. And so it's a risk management game there. So I can certainly understand that, but I don't think it's a realistic number.
You think it's too high or too low?
I think it's too low. I think there's going to be more growth certainly within the next cycle. Carolyn.
Quick question for you. What is it forecast-wise that are you breaking it down into categories for wage rates or not? Would be question one. And what category of types of jobs are you looking to target? Do we have enough property to do the job?
I think if you're looking at this year right now for what we've seen, we've lost a couple of very large, about 100 acre, 50 to 100 acre type projects that just we didn't have. There's a variety of factors that go into it, but we weren't able to accommodate for good or for bad. I mean, depending on where you're coming from, you may or may not be happy with that outcome. But for us, certainly looking at livability, living wages, jobs per acre is important. But some types of jobs that we're really well suited for, logistics and distribution is one that we kind of point out as well. If you kind of think of the Dollar Tree as kind of the whipping boy, I guess, for that. But it's a large amount of acreage with a small number of jobs. So it's a challenge both politically and logistically if we're looking at a limited number of acreage to try to recruit those type of projects. So we focus more on higher wage. I think Banfield is really our unicorn of opportunities and recruitments. It's relatively low impact as far as industry goes, very high wages, very community conscious, those types of things. So those are the type of employers that are ideal. With that said, there's a system to the economy as well too. And so having a diverse economy, allowing for a variety of types and being realistic about what the jobs per acre is really important to us, making sure that we understand that and the impact of those going forward.
Mike, earlier it was stated that the agricultural industry is a $51 million a year industry here. Do you know, is that the cash value of the crop itself, or is that including farm equipment, fertilizer, various other supplies and buildings, or is that the total aggregate?
I've seen the number, but I haven't broken it down, so I don't know if anybody else has much of that.
Better way of getting to Tim, because I think
okay.
you called on earlier.
I mean, it's the farm sales.
The crop
Yes.
itself.
Well, livestock, crops, all of that
Okay,
stuff.
so it doesn't include the other things such as livestock feed, fertilizer.
No.
So the industry is larger than.
Yes, if you take in the multipliers, it is larger. That's the farm sales in 2012.
And I'm sorry if you touched on it, but does your organization look actively at the farm inputs as far as the economic benefits to not just recruit maybe bigger agencies, which for small farming isn't yet, but processors or distribution? I mean, do you look at our Clark County as farming as an economic entity for what you're trying to do?
Yeah, we certainly follow the ag trends and the impact as far as the ag impact. I think the challenge is, a lot of times in economic development, we're focusing on just those key growth sectors. One of the challenges in general is ag, if the position is let's preserve ag, from a growth standpoint, when you're playing defense, you tend to lose over time. And what I'm really interested in, there's been some great work that's being done about how do we move ag forward? How do we grow ag as an economy? What does that look like here? And so having a very specific sense of what type of ag that we're looking for, what are we best suited to? We've worked with a local, I wouldn't say fast food, but a local food company that's headquartered here. And they're very interested in looking at how do we increase our distribution capacity here locally. So looking at how we can start to reach out and lessen the environmental impact, but also create a more sustainable food system locally. So we're interested, but there's a lot of competing forces as well too. So it really does take community involvement. It takes people who are willing to dive in and be dedicated to it. And then that's how we can start to help bring those extra partners to the table and make it work.
It's not that process, but I was wondering if you have areas in the county that you're most concerned about with you're mentioning that the smaller parcels are going to really impact the larger parcels for cultivating those bigger employers. Are there areas that you've been focusing on, the county's been focusing on, been spending money possibly, and trying to create commercial zones that you're most concerned about?
Yeah, there's particularly if you think about key transportation corridors where there's already strong transportation access, those are the areas where we tend to be most concerned about losing or parcelization. It's where the most immediate pressure is going to be for the largest type of employer impact. And so Ridgefield, if you look at kind of northwest in that area, there's some significant parcels that we're looking at and concerned about the impacts there. There's a little bit in Battleground has specific spots, but there's certainly some areas just outside the UGA or within existing UGA that would be concerned about.
Just trying to give people things that they can write down on.
Yeah, I think my hope is that ultimately, and the lawyers won't like this so much, but ultimately this type of a forum can work together in a way where we can have a sophisticated policy or alternative that moves forward and addresses a lot of these property rights issues that are legitimate, but also doesn't create long-term impacts or long-term issues.
All right, I think we're going to wrap it up after that. All right, again, thanks a lot for coming out and participating in these detailed conversations about the comprehensive plan process. We have a number of organizations that have set up on the outskirts to answer more questions that you might have, that you might have heard up here. Mike, I don't know, are you going to be able to answer some questions?
Yeah.
Okay, we have Mike will be standing over here. Tim will be in the front. Would you like to?
I'll be anywhere.
You'll be around, okay. And I think she might be around over at the Niche Gallery's Clark County Grown Chef Collaborative that we're going to be hosting just down the road. We have 2 chefs that have cooked up small plate dishes, $5 each. Wine bar next door. It's going to be a great time. So that's where all the plans really happen, right? Okay.
Right next to the Kiggins Theater.
Yeah, right next to the Kiggins Theater. So thanks a lot for coming out.